فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره مغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم هم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض من أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية اللهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري مستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى أعداك الأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أن حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية وإلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواج في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب الرحيم وامتاز اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر ما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهترون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده الملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العظيم.
صلوات صل على محمد محمد. پدر کی موت ہے مرنا جواں بیٹے کا سفر جہاں سے کرنا جواں بیٹے کا غضب خون کرنا جواں بیٹے کا ستم جی سے گزرنا جوان ستم جی سے گزرنا جوان بیٹے کا باب تھا کہ شہ مشرق سے چھوٹے محب و پیٹو کے اکبر حسین محب و پیٹو کے اکبر حسین سے خدا پیدر کو نہ دکھلائے مرگ راحت جان کلیجہ زخمی ہو جب دل کو پھر قرار کہاں ادھر تو سینہ ہے اکبر سے گزینوں کے سنا لہو در و چشم ماں لہو در و چشم ماں میں دین سے رواں طرف کے جانب گردون گاہ کی شین زمیں ہل گئے کیسی زمیں ہل گئے کیسی پکارتے ہوئے دوری میں رے شہید پسر میرے جواں میرے مہرو میرے سعید پسر میرے ہنسی میرے یوں یوسف میرے رشید پسر قریب ہو
گئی میدان سے یا
قریب ہو گئی میدان سے یا بھائی پدر پیار نئی واردات ہے بیٹا خبر نہیں مجھے دن ہے کہ رات خبر نہیں مجھے دن ہے کہ رات ہے
بیٹا
پکارتے تھے کہ شے پھر پکار مجھے نہیں بتانے کے لاشائے نابکار مجھے تیرے فراق میں ہے زیست ناگوار مجھے صدا سنا دے میں صفحے پھرے صدا سنا دے میں صفحے پھرے ایک بار
مجھے
گلے لگا لو کہ سینہ ہمارا جلتا ہے کلے جموں سے کوئی دم کلے جموں سے کوئی دم
نکلتا ہے
پکاری دیوری سے بانوں پہ سر ملا کے نہیں بتاؤ مرہم زخم جگر ملا کے نہیں ستم کے ابر میں میرا کمر ملا کے نہیں علی کے لال وہ علی گوہر علی کے لال وہ علی گوہر ملا
کہ نہیں
کتاب لاؤ میرے منتوں کے پالے کو تمہیں سے لوں گی میں اپنے
مراد
تمہیں سے لوں گی میں اپنے مراد والے کو یہ ذکر تاکہ صدا آئی دور سے ناگاہ جناب قبلہ کعبہ بائے للہ حضور حال سے بیٹے کے کیا نہیں آغاز زبائر گئی ہے غلام زبائر گئی ہے غلام کی آشا قد رہا ہے دم اب موت جان لیتی ہے پکارنے کی بھی طاقت
جواب
پکارنے کی بھی طاقت پکارنے کی بھی طاقت جواب دیتی
ہے
صدا یہ سنتے ہی سلطان بحر و بر دوڑے یہ درد دل تھکے تھامے ہوئے جگر دوڑے کبھی تو فوج پہ مانند شیر نر دوڑے کبھی ادھر کے روتے کبھی ادھر کے روتے کبھی ادھر
دوڑے
لٹی ہوئی وہ کمائی بس تلاش ملی زمیں پہ خون میں غلطہ پسر زمیں پہ خون میں غلطہ پسر کی لاش ملی
سورة الفاتحة and 3 Surah Ikhlas are requested for the following. Marhoomeen. Syed Mohammad Abutalib Zaidi, Syed Nasir Hussain Zaidi, Sayyidah Fakhr Nisa Begum, Syed Asadullah Musfi, Syed Mohammad Abdul Zaidi, Sayyidah Miraj Khatun, Sayyidah Shahbaz Zaidi, Syed Raza Haider, Syed Qurban Ali, Amjad Ali Khan, Abbas Ali Khan, Maulana Haider Madian Tamam, Marhoomeen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا حق أبو الحق بالقاسم مصطفى محمد وعلى ولي الله وسيع رسول الله صد الله الغالب غالب كل غالب مظهر الأجاب علي بن أبي طالب اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله ورسوله إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ذلك خير وأحسن تعويلا صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Iftar time is fast approaching, so I won't take up too much of your time. But inshallah, today I would like to talk with all of you about one of the most important aspects of Islamic history within the personalities of Islam that I've come across a lot within my readings that I don't think is mentioned enough in sufficient detail. And it's something that is present in the dynamics both within our communities, in the political structures that govern Islam, that produce Islamic states, all the way from early Islamic history until the contemporary time. And that is the idea of leadership within Islam as derived within the Quran, within the Sunnah, and within the actions of our Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalatu wassalam. This is something that is active and present both within discussions in the Ahlul Sunnah and the Ahlul Tashayyu, but particularly within the month of Shahr Ramadan. We observe two things. We observe first the birth of one of the leaders of the youth of paradise, Sayyid al-Shabab Ahlul Jannah, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And a leader second only to Rasulullah in terms of his intellect, in terms of his capacity in a managerial, in a governmental role and capacity, Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala. And I thought it would be interesting to cover the importance of this concept of leadership as found within Islam and found within the Quran. The ayat that I just read from Surah An-Nisa, verse number 59, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O those of you who have believed, Ati'u Allah, obey Allah, wa ati'u Rasul, and obey Rasulullah, wa ulil amri minkum, and those in authority amongst you. And this is a very sort of abstract concept as when we, as us as lay Shia, when we look at this, we think of who are these people who have authority amongst us? What does it precisely mean to have authority in a community, in a society, in a government, in a group, whatever sort of institution we're working with? What does it mean to have authority in these places? The Quran makes reference to many different sort of leaders in different forms throughout its text. And we, within our own sort of teachings and upbringings, have many sort of different conceptions of who a person of leadership is. But in so doing, it's important to know and for us to sort of ask and really deeply interrogate, what does an effective leader look like and how does an effective leader dispense their duties effectively? So when we look at ourselves And when we look at each other as well, each and every one of us, fundamentally within Islam, has the capacity to be at least some sort of leader. Even if it's just, the leader of your households, the leader of a community, the leader of, your respective masajid, the leader of your football team. Shout out Al Noor FC, you guys are doing great things, inshallah, next season. Everyone looks to themselves and everyone looks to others for, aspects of leadership. This is a very sort of innate human condition. We all look to other people and we strive to be like other people. And we're attracted to people who have great characteristics of leadership and governance and sort of authority amongst us. And so within the Ahl al-Tashayyu', within us as the Shia, we very much, when I considered this idea of leadership, the first group of individuals that I considered and I focused on were our ulama. We look at our public intellectuals, and not only do they have the intellectual capacity, but mashallah, they have the ability to naturally develop this great sort of leadership within our communities. From the beginning, we've had great personalities, like from the likes of Allama, Sheikh Tusi, Allama Hilli, Allama Majlisi, all of these, some of whom were actually present and exercised and gave great leadership, sometimes in defiance of the government, and they led others to haqq, they led the Shia and their groups to justice. And this is a quality that I think we should try and strive to at least emulate within ourselves today. So within this lecture, I'm hoping to very much dissect this idea and appraise this concept of leadership. What does it mean within the religion of Islam? And how can we apply the lessons found within both scripture and practice within our sort of day-to-day lives? And I want to do this through four main ways. Firstly, what does the Quran say the conditions are for a person to be a leader? What conditions does it lay out? What sort of qualities, sort of a job description, what qualities does it lay out? What sort of competencies does it want for a person who is a leader? Secondly, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How does Rasulullah exemplify these characteristics of leadership within his life in the sort of fledgling years of early Islamic history? Number three, how does Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali develop and build upon the sort of legacy that Rasulullah built in governing a territory that was far larger than Rasulullah had governed in the first place? And what sort of examples do we have within early Islamic history that allow us to see the great leader that he was? And fourthly, what sort of non-infallible characters within early Islamic history can we look to for a more potentially relatable source of leadership that we can incorporate in our everyday lives? So inshallah, this will be our discussion for today. If we can begin with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the first main sort of point of contention here is, what does it mean to be a leader and how does the Quran define it? There are many ways that the Quran defines leadership in the most abstract sense. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a Nabi as being an authority amongst the community, a Rasul as being an authority amongst the community. Surah number 5, verse number 55 talks about how Allah, إنما بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم راكعون. Your walis are Allah, Rasulullah, and those who establish prayer and pay zakat whilst in ruku. And obviously this is in reference to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. And then obviously the ayat that I first mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, they're sort of ulul amr, these in authority, these individuals in authority amongst ourselves. Interestingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about these individuals as having varying capacities of authority and different forms of leadership and authority over a community or over an ummah. First and foremost, the Quran makes something very clear and sort of clarifying this point. Not everyone is meant to be a sort of the most authoritative and the most high leader. And even those who are leaders in their respective groups vary in their responsibilities and their capacities with one another. Surah number 43, verse number 32. I'm sort of jumping between ayats. I'm sorry if it gets like a bit whiplashy in that sense. But Surah number 43, verse number 32 makes right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do they distribute the mercy of your Lord? It is we who have apportioned among them their livelihood in this life, in the life of this world, apologies, and have raised some of them above others in degrees of rank that they may make use of one another for service. Within this ayat, what do we see? We see that when, for example, when Allah divinely appoints a prophet, undoubtedly they are all leaders. Undoubtedly, Nabi Isa, Nabi Musa, Nabi Yunus, Nabi Yaqub, Nabi Yusuf, all of the prophets that we see within our sort of compendium of prophets that we latch upon and that we draw inspiration from, they were all leaders. But some are undoubtedly more important leaders and had more authority than others. Nabi Sulaiman had a larger authority than, for example, Nabi Yaqub.
Trial.
In a sort of objective sense, that some leaders vary in authority amongst one another. And I mean, within the most absolute sense, is there a leader, or is there an authority that had more leadership capacity and authority than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So it begs the question, why does Allah do this? Why is there a sort of natural hierarchy of leaders within our societies? And why are some raised above others to become leaders? I think the answer is very sort of simple, and it's because within our societies, we require these leaders, because without them, we would go astray. Going back to the Quran, Surah number 17, verse 71, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, on the day, yani on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when we summon each community along with its leader. We will summon each community along with its leader. We will summon each society that has been exposed to the message of Allah with their respective leader. And so, in this sense, the symbiosity, the sort of relationship between the community and the leader is very sort of intrinsic, and it's very sort of deeply and intimately tied with one another. This leadership is not a light thing. Even with those who have maybe an absolute sense of less authority than some others, those in position of guardianship, of wilaya, of leadership, they have a responsibility of the to their community or to their group, no matter how small, no matter how big. So this is the first thing, the fact that, leaders vary in their responsibilities and their capacities. In the second thing, despite it not being a light thing, it's very important to know leadership is a rahmah. Leadership is a grace from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah number 25, verse number 74, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for those who pray, for those amongst you in this society that pray, their prayers make them models for the righteous. Using your prayers, establishing one of the main sort of tenets of the religion of Islam makes you a model for other people. And in this sense, we see an answer or a potential exemplification of how an individual, any sort of individual, can be an exemplar for someone else. This is the case for most people, but for others, and indeed for most sort of leaders that we find within our communities, a leadership is a test from Allah. Sometimes we may not see it, but the leadership and the sort of burden and onus of leadership that we establish is a test from Allah. We may have, masalan, the money, we may have the social skills, we may have the sort of prestige, but it is the burden of, sharing and bestowing this with others that is the greatest test for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah number 27, verse 40, describes the story of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. When Nabi Sulaiman asks for the Queen of Sheba's throne to be brought in front of him, one of the jinn who answers him says, I can bring it to you within a blink of an eye. I can bring it to you within a blink of an eye. And when the throne is brought in front of him, he remarked, this is from the favor of my Lord to test me to see whether I will be grateful or not. There are many tests that we associate with leadership, whether you have the physical stamina, the emotional capacity, the mental stamina. But the most important test within the Quran, at least as established within the Quran, is to see whether you are a grateful or ungrateful individual. And thus one can say the institution of leadership reduces you to a point of humility. This is the main test with leadership, whether you are a humble individual or not. It doesn't matter whether you please your community, it doesn't matter whether you satisfy every need within your community. The only person you need to satisfy and worry about is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah 19, verse number 30 again. Sorry for going backwards and forwards, but Surah 19, verse number 30. When Lady Maryam is being sort of taunted and ridiculed by her town for having a child outside of marriage, what does Isa alayhi salam say when he is born? What is the first thing he says when he is born? Qala inni Abdullah. I'm not Rasulullah. I'm not, what can I say? I'm not the president of Jerusalem. I'm not the president of Bethlehem. I am Qala inni Abdullah. I am a slave of Allah. This is the most important test one has to pass before being considered the most effective of leaders, to see whether you are humble enough to devolve yourself underneath the auspices of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't matter if you're a messenger of God, doesn't matter if you're a king, doesn't matter if you're a Rasul. What is most important is whether you are humble in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to whom is this most often reinforced within the religion of Islam today? None other than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If we look at the tashahhud, when we read salat every single day, what do we say? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. We don't say Muhammadan rasuluhu abduhu. We say Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. We say first and foremost that Rasulullah is a slave of Allah before he is the Rasul. This is the most important thing that we can do. This is the most important qualifier that Rasulullah makes and that Allah makes and that we make every single day, 5 times a day, to understand that the position and the capacity of leadership is one that humbles you in front of Allah. Surah number 33, Surah Ahzab, verse number 21. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed, in Rasulullah you have an excellent example for whoever has hope in Allah and Yawm al-Qiyamah and remembers Allah very often. See, within here we understand that Rasulullah is our perfect, the best possible example that we could take as Muslims in order to emulate him, in order to imbibe the lessons and the characteristics he had within our sort of day-to-day lives. And a point of understanding and a point of sort of contention here, do you think, it's very interesting, Rasulullah wouldn't have been a good example had he not practiced what he preached? And Rasulullah practiced what he preached every single day. This wasn't something that, the Quran came down and Rasulullah was doing another thing. The Quran came down and Rasulullah, everything that he was saying, he was practicing to the highest and the most efficient possible sense. I mean, Rasulullah, for example, if we were to say that a good leader had, a soft heart, if we were to say that, for example, a leader forgave people, and if we were to say that, for instance, a leader makes excuses for others, we would say, okay, fine, maybe Rasulullah exemplified this within the space of a month or a year. What if I said Rasulullah exemplified this in the space of one afternoon? Very interestingly, the Battle of Uhud, something that looms large within the subconscious of many of the Muslims, was a big disaster, was a disaster strategically for the early Islamic conquest. Rasulullah was injured in battle. Rasulullah lost 70 very good men, and he lost almost importantly of all, he lost his uncle, Hazrat Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. Hoping he could count on some people, and I'll leave you to understand and guess who these people are. They actually run away in the heat of battle. And the Quran brings a very sort of interesting and, unique way of looking at this battle rather than looking at, it being a sort of quote-unquote objective loss. We look at it in another matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Imran, verse 159, فَبِمَنْ رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لَنْتَ لَهُمْ وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضْنَا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. It is out of Allah's mercy that you, Ya Rasulullah, have been lenient with them. Had you been cruel or hard-hearted, they would have certainly abandoned you. So, first, pardon them. Secondly, ask Allah's forgiveness for them. And thirdly, and sometimes I think this is the most amazing thing, consult with them in conducting matters. Imagine, Rasulullah has been let down. Objectively, he has been let down, and he knows himself he has been let down. But rather than be angry and annoyed, what does he do? He first forgives. He secondly has a soft heart, and rather than exclude them from the decision-making process, he asks for their advice in what he should do going forward. He is Rasulullah, he doesn't need anyone. Rasulullah has Allah, and Allah is enough. But it is him giving them this sort of vote of confidence that inspires confidence in his leadership. And in this you see the sort of reciprocity of leadership within the Quran. It is dependent on you being a good leader, but it's also making sure that people want to follow you in the first place. Our last final point that I'll say quickly before we wrap up, being a leader who deals with everyone and deals with everyone equally is such an important point. And Rasulullah did so when he went to Medina. He realized that there were other groups living there, the Jews of Medina, the non-Muslims of Medina. And rather than exclude them from the decision-making process, Rasulullah incorporated them within the first nascent Islamic state. In an objective sense, Imam Ali alayhi salam dealt with a far larger geographical space than Rasulullah did. Imam Ali's state ranged from all the way to Libya, I think modern-day Libya, all the way eastward to Mashhad in Iran. And you rarely see that the emperors of these big, large states are humble. You know, the bigger the empire, the more unhumble and the more corrupt and the more sort of big-headed the leader becomes. But with Sayyidina Ali, this could be further from the truth. This could not be further from the truth. And there is one example within Imam Ali's work that exemplifies this perfectly, and it is Nahj al-Balagha. It is the 53rd letter of Nahj al-Balagha, when Imam Ali is writing and speaking to Malik al-Ashtar, who had just been appointed the governor of Egypt. You know, in Egypt and many of our Muslim societies today, we have sizable Christian communities, we have sizable minority communities, and it is very easy for, you know, these communities to be cast to the wayside. But Imam Ali lays out, and I'm going to mention here, 3 main things that make him one of the most effective leaders possible. In the first, Imam Ali tells Malik al-Ashtar, when he takes the governorship of Egypt, to make sure your heart is pure when serving your people. Develop in your heart the feeling of love for your people, and let it be a source of kindness for them. I know we always think of leadership as this very sort of emotionless thing, but Imam Ali is always very, very interestingly bringing a healthy amount of emotion back into this equation. You know, we always do this dua when we're in Qunut. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Allahumma Ya Muqallib al-Qulub, Thabbit Qalbi ala Dinik. Place my religion, or sort of position our heart within your religion. And it's an amazing thing how Imam Ali, for example, exemplified this, where he had heart and he had hands strong enough to lift the doors of Khaybar, but he had hands soft enough to feed the orphans of Kufa. There is something so poetic and so amazing about how leadership can be both the hard and it can be the soft. It can be the difficult decisions, and it can be also the light and more emotional questions as well. Another important thing that Imam Ali says to Malik al-Ashtar is this idea that within your country, within the governorship that you have, these people are either your brothers in faith or they are your equals in humanity. And this is a line that we've heard time and time and time again. I mean, if we look at the citizenship or the area of Egypt, I mean, what a beautiful, amazing line. I mean, if we're looking at most of the conflicts in the world right now, how many of them are for very sort of futile reasons? If we taught this line to presidents, to prime ministers around the world, I can assure you that many of these conflicts would cease, because we would have this sort of common empathy and this common humanity that seems to be devoid from a lot of our leadership today. The last sort of thing I would like to mention before we wrap up is this idea of, you know, many people would come to me after this majlis and say, oh, but we have a lot of these individuals who are great examples for us, but Masalan, Imam Ali, Rasulullah, they're infallible. How can I ever potentially reach their heights, reach their standards? The one thing, it is important to not view them as a sort of perfect, not view them as sort of an entire package, because we can never imagine to be as great as Imam Ali or Rasulullah, but rather there are some phenomenal characteristics, and there are so many phenomenal characteristics within these individuals that we can draw from. And secondly, there are still some amazing, non-infallible characters, but still some amazing, phenomenal leaders within our communities or within the early Islamic community that really stepped up and showed some leadership that helped drive the religion of Islam forward. There is none, in my opinion, better than Hazrat Abutalib alayhi salam. When, you know, we talk about the earlier lessons that we were talking about of treating everyone equally or with kindness and a nice sort of sense of, you know, empathy and emotion, Rasulullah was brought into the house of Hazrat Abutalib, and he was raised as one of his children. I think Syed Mohammad talks about this in one of his manqaba, this sort of idea of Hazrat Abutalib taking someone who isn't his son and raising him to the extent of Rasulship, to him becoming Rasulullah. What an amazing, amazing thing. I think in the second instance, we can look at another figure, Masalan, Sayyidah Khadija. Sayyidah Khadija, what a wonderful, wonderful woman who was, at the sense in the early Islamic history, you know, someone who was undoubtedly in a more financial and a socially higher position than Rasulullah. But she utilized her leadership and her position to assist that religion of Islam. The moral and emotional support that she provided cannot be understated, both for Sayyidah Khadija and for Hazrat Abutalib. And so, when we see these lessons in the Quran for leadership, they're not just for the infallibles, but they're for all of us. And there's so many lessons that we can derive from today. And it is because of these two amazing figures that, despite them not being infallible, that when Rasulullah lost them, it was his year of grief. It was his Aam al-Huzn. Rasulullah famously said, if it weren't for the sword of Ali, the protection of Hazrat Abutalib, and the money and the wealth of Sayyidah Khadija, that the religion of Islam would have been destroyed. And when we talk about Rasulullah and these tests of leadership, when he lost both of these great figures in 1 year, what an amazing and what an immense test that must have been for him. When Sayyidah Khadija died, Sayyidah Khadija didn't even have a coffin long enough to bury her own body. When she didn't even have a coffin to bury herself, she didn't even have a coffin for Rasulullah to wrap herself in. And it is such an emotional and such a testing time for someone to be buried without a coffin, or to be buried without a coffin long enough for their body. And Rasulullah, it is said in the narration that when Rasulullah saw that he didn't have a coffin long enough for Sayyidah Khadija, he looked up to the heavens and he said, Ya Allah, I am your Rasul, please help me in my time of need. And it is said in the narration that Angel Jibreel, Hazrat Jibreel, brought down 5 coffin. Hazrat Jibreel brought down 5 coffin. And it is mentioned later by Imam Ali, when Imam Ali is on his deathbed, that we will come to in a couple of weeks' time. When Imam Ali is on his deathbed, he remembers this time, and he remembers Rasulullah burying Sayyidah Khadija. And he says to his children, I remember when Rasulullah was bought 5 segments of kafan. And the first kafan went to Sayyidah Khadija. The second kafan I used, Yani Amir al-Mu'mineen. The second kafan I used to bury Rasulullah. The third kafan, Ya Hassan and Hussein. The third kafan I ask you to bury me in. The fourth kafan I used to bury Fatima al-Zahra. The 5th kafan will be used to bury Hassan al-Mujtaba. And it is said in the narrations, Sayyidah Zainab comes to Imam Ali and says, Ya Baba, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, where is the kafan for your son Hussein? Where is the kafan for your son Hussein? Amir al-Mu'mineen looks at Zainab and says, Ya Zainab, there will be no kafan to bury Imam Hussein. Hussein will lie dead on the plains of Karbala for 3 days without kafan. Hussein will lie in the plains of Karbala for 3 days without kafan. Brothers, I won't take you much longer, but I just want to mention that this majlis was established almost 20 years ago by my father for his father, Syed Mohammad Abutalib Zaidi. And after my father's loss, inshallah, this majlis will be kept in his dua and his memory. My father was a man of, a community engagement, of intellect, but first and foremost, he was a servant of Allah, as we mentioned today. And inshallah, just as he helped and he assisted his community, inshallah, may Allah elevate us to a position where we are able to assist our communities, to give ourselves positions of leadership within our communities. Ya Allah, please help those who are suffering around the world right now. Please help them. Please help the people of Gaza. Please help the people of Palestine. Please help the people of Afghanistan. All around the world of Yemen. All around the world that are facing any sort of musibah, Ya Allah. We pray that in this month of Ramadan, you show your rahmah and you bestow your rahmah onto all of these people. ربنا وتقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.